Okay, so you are naming an angle, and the angle that you're going to name is the one that's marked in red. Okay, so here, this is pretty simple. You just click on the angle symbol, this one here, the little one that looks like an arc, and then you put the letter. Okay. Now, there's different ways you can name it. You don't just have to put the letter, but we're going to focus on just that. Okay, so here, same thing, angle G. Pretty easy. Okay. Okay, then it might ask you questions like this, like, is this a right, obtuse, acute, or straight? Acute means less than 90, obtuse bigger than 90. A right is equal to 90. Straight is like 180 straight across. So that's what this is 180 degrees, so it's a straight angle. Okay, so again, name this angle. Now, there's different ways to name the angle, and as you get higher in points, it's going to ask you to actually show different ways. Okay, so this, for instance, I could do the same thing, click the little angle symbol, and then what I'm going to do is use all three letters to define the angle. Okay, so the only thing that matters here is to make sure that the angle, the letter for the angle is in the middle. So if I'm going to start with E, sorry, it's jumping around. And then the letter in the middle is D. Sorry, I don't know why it keeps jumping. And then the last letter is F. So what all that matters is that that angle is in the letter for the angle is in the middle. So I could also put FDE like that, and it's the same thing, okay? This is the same thing. I could put just angle W, which is probably the easiest thing to do, or put VWX, or I could start with X and put XWV. Okay, so it doesn't matter how you do that. Now let me jump up to the one where you're actually going to have to name it three different ways. Okay, so you can start with the easy one, just put angle and then the letter. The second one and the third, you're going to need to name it using all three letters. So here I'll start with V, make sure that W is in the middle. And then the last one I'll start with the angle symbol and put X first, W in the middle, and then put V last. Okay, so you just got to make sure that that letter is in the middle, and that's how you define the angle. Okay, so that's it for that assignment. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Obviously, you got an ed puzzle, and in the ed puzzle, you're going to go over more triangle congruence rules. And so we'll look at what that is in this here in this IXL assignment. So here, this is a little bit of review from last week, but if you notice, there's a new rule, and it's called AAS. So just to review from last week, the rules that we had were ASA, and in that case, you had, let's say you had two triangles. That means you had two congruent angles. And remember, the letter S, the side for the letter S for side is in the middle of the two angles. That means that over here, they had to be in between. And you had one congruent side in the middle of those two angles. Okay, so that means that both of these triangles are congruent, or they're the exact same. Okay, the other one we would have is SAS, so two sides with an angle in between. So now, if I take like the same kind of look here, I would have two sides. So let's say this side and this side are congruent. And on this triangle, this side and this side have the same congruent sides. And then in between those two sides, I had a congruent angle. Okay, so that would be SAS. Okay. And again, you don't need to take notes on this. We're not, writing the notebook. If you want to take these notes down, that's fine, but you guys should have this in your notebook already. Okay. The next one would be SSS, which means that you have, of three congruent sides. So basically, three sides and they're all equal. And you notice there's no angles in this one. All you need to know is that there's 3 sides and they're all equal. Okay, so that proves that those are congruent. The one that's new this week is AAS, angle, angle, side. Okay, what that looks like is you'll have an angle, another angle, and the side, notice how the S is not in the middle like the first one, ASA. It's to the right, okay, or outside of the 2 angles. So that means it won't be in between here. It's going to be on the side here, or it could be here. Okay, so on the other triangle, you're also going to have a congruent side there. Now, what's important about this one is where that side is. The location matters. So for instance, let me erase that. And now, actually, no, we'll keep this one, okay, because these are, we'll say that's right. So let's draw the same triangle, same angles, but now I'm going to put the side over here. That's congruent. Now notice the difference. In the first triangle, that side is right next to the angle that has 2 marks on both triangles. But then I go over to this triangle and notice how the side is not next to the angle with 2 marks. Now it's next to the other angle. This would not be congruent. Okay, so the location of that side has to be next to the same congruent angle. Okay, so that's important for that. Okay, so let's look at that in IXL. Okay, so now in this problem, what they're asking you to do is pick the 2 that match according to this theorem. So they'll tell you, okay, with angle, angle, side, which of these are congruent, okay? Well, let's take a look at the angles. Well, I see that each one of them has the 2 angles, okay? They all have the same 2 angles with the 1 mark and 2 marks. Okay, then I look at the side. The first one has 1 mark, this has 1 mark, and this one, if you guys notice, has 2 marks. So that one is not congruent because it has to have 1 mark. Okay, so that's, we can kind of go off of that to start with. Now, over here, what you're going to do is, since these 2 over here are the ones you're going to use, you have to make a congruent statement. Okay, so I'm going to go down here, and it doesn't matter what letters you start with. So I'm just going to pick this first triangle, and I can start with any letter. So what I'll start with is R. And then I'll put S, and then I'll put Q. And again, it doesn't matter what order. I could go RQS or SRQ or QRS. What matters is the next triangle. The next triangle needs to match up. Okay, so I started with R on the first one. If I started with R here, and notice how it has the 2 marks, that means that the first letter in the next triangle should be K. All right, then the next one I used was S, and that was the angle with 1 mark, so that means my next letter would be J. So then I'd go K, J, I in the second triangle. Okay, so again, you just want to make sure it matches up when you are writing that out. Okay, so again, you got to pick which 2 are correct, which 2 are congruent, and then write the statement. Okay, so I'll do one more example like that. This one, you can kind of see it right away. Again, it's asking you to use the ASA theorem, so angle, side, angle. So that means you need to have 2 angles with 1 side in the middle. So you notice right away that here, again, you've got a side that doesn't match up with these 2. Has to have 1 mark, or at least 2 of them have to have the same mark. Okay, and this one has 2 marks here, so that's not our triangle we want to use. Okay, so here, if I start with, let's say this one here, the HIJ, I'm going to go ahead and start with H. Sure, why not? H, and I'll go I, then J. All right, so H has 2 marks, so that means D is the first letter of the next one. I has 1 mark, so that's E, so it would be DEF. Okay, so that's how you do that IXL. You got to pick which 2 are congruent and then write this statement. Okay, so now let's go to the next IXL assignment. Oops, I got to turn that off. So LK5. So now notice you have all four theorems you're working with here. Okay, so now here in the first type of problem, I've got angle and an angle, and then there's no side in the middle. It's off to the side over here. And what's important is I got to make sure that that side is right next to the same angle down here. So I notice it's got two marks here. The side is right next to the same one. So those match up, and it's an angle, two angles, and a side is not in the middle. It's like next to the angle. So I mean, this would be AAS. We'd want to use that one. Okay, so this is a good example. Okay, so here I've got an angle and two sides. So really what this is SS, because there's no angle in the middle of the two sides. So you go SSA or ASS, and that's not a rule that we can use to prove that these two match. Like if all you have is one angle and two sides, and the angle is not in the middle or in between the two sides, then you can't prove it's right. So this would be a can't prove or cannot be proven to be congruent. Okay, so now this one, if you're gonna, you might look at it and say right away, okay, well, all they're giving us is one angle, one side, so they're not congruent. But what we're not seeing is that there's a hidden measure that we don't know about, okay? And that's what's new this week. So when you have two lines that cross, okay? We have two lines that cross, and let's just say we have two triangles here, right? We have two lines that cross. The angles that are straight across from each other are going to be equal. That's just naturally, that's what happens when you have two lines that cross. So let's say that was like 34 degrees right there. Then that would mean that this angle straight across from it would also be 34 degrees. Okay. Now these two angles are going to be different than those angles, but they're straight across from each other just like the others, so they also will be equal. Now, when you have two angles like this that are like, if you add these two up, they will be equal 180. Because if you from basically from here to here, that's 180 degrees. Okay, so to find that angle, let's say I had that number right there, I basically would just subtract from 180. Okay, so here, this would be 146 degrees. So if that's 146 degrees, that means straight across, that is also 146 degrees. Okay, this is called, or these are called vertical angles. When you guys go over the notes today, if you haven't done it already, you'll learn about that, vertical angles. And there's one more property that you'll learn about, but you guys will see that when you take the notes. Okay, so here you can see that it crosses right here in the middle. So that means that this angle, I'm going to put two lines because I already have one line here, and this angle are also congruent. So notice what we have now. So now we have an angle right here. We have an angle right here. And look what's in between. We have a congruent side, so ASA. So that's how those are congruent. So just because it's not written doesn't mean that there's not another side or angle that might be matching or might be congruent. So this would be ASA.